Former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon left the Trump administration less than a week after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, back in 2017. While some say Bannon still has a direct line to the White House, he has turned his focus to spreading his controversial nationalist ideology.
The new documentary, The Brink, is an official selection for the 2019 Sundance Film Festival. It follows Bannon through the 2018 midterm elections and shows his efforts to mobilize far-right parties in order to win seats in the May 2019 European parliamentary elections. So Alison Klayman is the director of The Brink, and she joins us now from Boston. Alison, so glad that you joined us. I have not seen the movie, but the trailer looks really good. I'll tell you that much. It's about to be in sort of wide release. So tell us more about the documentary, you know, what you captured and what your goal was when you took on this challenge.
So when I had the opportunity to have this kind of access to Steve Bannon right after he left the White House, my interest was really in what kind of access that would afford me beyond Steve Bannon. It was really about going behind the curtain on not just sort of the far right, but really, frankly, the mainstream of the Republican Party, and seeing not just what they say, but what they do, you know, how they operate, who's supporting them, and where that movement was going to be headed.
So, when you first met Steve Bannon, what was your impression? Was it different than the image that most people have of him through the media?
It was. I mean, again, I didn't do this because I had a personal fascination with him. I really thought of Bannon the way that any, you know, average American, you know, who sees him through the media. At that time, it was, you know, death itself on SNL. You know, he was the great manipulator on the cover of Time magazine. Really a lot of negative, kind of dark, evil genius type of portrayals. When I first met him, he kind of struck me as like avuncular, and he was actually, you know, made a lot of self-deprecating jokes. He was, you know, very human, not, you know, which you shouldn't be surprised about. What I found though about what his actions were, you know, kind of didn't really jive with the way that he was kind of being portrayed. He is able to really do a lot of manipulation of the media more than actually being a great political strategist with policies behind his ideas.
So this is the style of this documentary, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's called verite, right? You're just sort of like following him around. There's no commentary.
Exactly.
You don't have him sort of sitting down and doing a formal interview. Why did you choose this style?
So I think that, you know, one of the ways that I think Bannon is able to get a lot of airtime for his ideas is because he tries to dominate a news cycle, something that, you know, for better or worse, that's, you know, how the world of journalism operates. Verite documentary gets to be really different. It's a really privileged position because I can spend a really long time observing him, and then I'm allowed to kind of draw conclusions based on the patterns that I see. You know, if you see that someone who lies, someone who has, you know, hypocrisies between the rhetoric versus the actions, you know, who he says he's working for versus who he's actually spending time with, that's all able to kind of come to the surface when you do something in a verite documentary style. And that's why, you know, we chose that way to do the film.
So, just continuing along that thread, I mean, Hannah Arendt coined that term, banality of evil. And I'm not suggesting that Steve Bannon is evil, but the idea that someone who presents themselves as sort of an everyman, an unassuming person who all of a sudden has outsized influence over the lives of millions of people can in fact end up doing really terrible things, or at least suggesting terrible things. Are you worried at all that you might be portraying him as a sympathetic figure, or perhaps not challenging him? Is that a concern, or has that not been something that you've, you know, if you're just following him along, the camera is the sole judge?
So, I mean, that was a concern. You know, the whole project for me was really like, how am I making sure that I am not doing that? I feel very confident that this film is not a positive portrayal of him. All you have to do is, you know, look at, you know, not only a lot of the writings, but, you know, experts like Cass Mudd, who's one of the leading academics who studies populism worldwide. People are really saying this film exposes, you know, it's actually very carefully crafted, even though it's a very fair portrayal. There's no, manipulation in terms of the meaning of his words or the scenes and how they went down. But it's about, culling down 200 hours that I shot, over 13 months, and really distilling a picture and holding him accountable for what he says and what his actions actually are.
Okay, so Steve Bannon may or may not be an evil character, but you spend a lot of time with him. Is Steve Bannon racist? He spends an awful lot of time cozying up to sort of extremist ideology, if you will, nationalist extremist ideology that is often anti-immigrant and anti-Islam.
So, by my definition of racist or anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, it really does have to come down, again, to your actions. What are the policies that you're putting forward? Who are the people that you're actively working with or just even willing to tolerate? To me, if that includes things like exclusionary policies, racist policies, anti-Semitic dog whistles, things that have led to violence from Pittsburgh to New Zealand, by my definition, I think he has to be held responsible for all of those ideologies.
Okay, I mean that is, I mean that's sort of what we were driving at, because in my mind, racism, the idea that one race is superior to another, that one ideology is superior to another, that one even religion is superior to another, is something that he has advocated, and generally he's advocated for those who are Caucasian in all those instances.
And that's totally, that's the thing, like, you mentioned before, he is kind of going around and really trying to reframe his message as being more about economics and, coining these terms. It's really like a branding exercise and talking about economic nationalism and jobs. He talks a really good game. He can say a lot of emotionally evocative things. Again, it goes back to what the film does, is it doesn't just give him a lot of room to give those kinds of stump speeches, and what it actually does is put it all in context and hold him accountable for who he's meeting with, what they're talking about behind closed doors. When he's getting behind closed doors with far-right party leaders from Europe and around the world, or he's in, meetings with billionaires, they're not talking about how to bring jobs back to people. They're worrying about birth rates. They're talking about how to keep immigrants and migrants out of Europe and America. It's very clear, to me, the only framework that does make sense, if it's not just for a sort of personal enrichment, you have to apply a white nationalist framework to understand, why they would be talking about these things.
I have often wondered what Bannon's motivation is. Like, after getting President Trump elected, which he's sort of has patted himself on the back about, then what's the end game here? What does he actually want?
Well, I think the film definitely I put together the best arrangement of clues from my time with him to kind of give to you to help you answer that question. I don't know if the film answers it. I do think verite documentary, part of what's so great about the form and documentary in general, it really is about asking the right questions. It's not always about giving answers. That's propaganda. Frankly, that's the kind of filmmaking that Steve Bannon does. But I would say it is kind of complicated because it feels like some mixture of, personal aggrandizement and wanting to be important and powerful, and some other ideologies that, I think we can all talk about. But the bottom line to me is I don't know what's in Bannon's heart ultimately. I mean, for all the time I spent with him, I can't see inside, only he knows. But I really don't care. I think he has to be held accountable for his actions.
Yeah, and Alison, it's just interesting. I wonder if you were able to learn, or do we see in the documentary, he presents himself now as an everyman, but he's from the moneyed classes. I mean, this is a guy who was an officer in the Navy. He went to Harvard Business School, or at least Harvard undergrad.
Well, he worked his way up to that.
I get that, but I mean, there's a certain level of privilege that has accompanied his entire life up until this very moment. And yet, the way that he presents himself and sort of disheveled, and this guy's a multimillionaire, and he's talking about, he's trying to present these ideologies around the framework of economic nationalism, even though he's from the wealthy class.
I mean, look, he definitely is, you see in the film, he's a millionaire funded by billionaires. You definitely can't imagine that he's carrying water for anything except a super rich elite class, because that's who is backing him. That's who he spends most of his time with. But, I also think that it's important to remember that part of that is to say he is not as fringe a figure as some people would like to believe. He is absolutely the mainstream of the Republican Party. You know, he is for everything he decries about, you know, the super rich, you know, that is the world that he is living in. And it's not just about calling out hypocrisy, it's because if you can't then take his rhetoric at face value that he's doing something for, you know, sort of the little guy, right? Because the super rich are not threatened by whatever they think it is he's trying to do.
Right,
exactly.
exactly.
They clearly don't think it's going to upset the balance of power or wealth when it comes to them. You know, his ideas really in the end boil down to deregulation and a lot of, you know, cruelty and xenophobic policies revolving around a wall.
So before I let you go, I have sort of a lighter story, and Vlad touched on that. Bannon's appearance, his layered shirts, his disheveled look, his sort of permanent 5 o'clock shadow, is that deliberate?
You know, I don't know. I mean, he wears a lot of the same outfits, and he definitely wears that expensive, is it Berber jacket or Barber jacket? He wears a very expensive jacket as like part of his look. But, you know, I think that ultimately what I think it all says about him is that he really does have his eyes on the prize. You know, he is really focused. Again, it's really hard to say exactly on what, except that winning, that sort of tenacious thing, you know, you see even after he loses in terms of, you know, wanting the Republicans to keep the House, you know, in the midterms. That's not how it turns out. But the movie doesn't really end with him, you know, throwing in the towel. And I think it's really important for people to understand he's, you know, out there playing politics, and, you know, that makes him a formidable opponent, even if I think there's a lot that the movie does that kind of diminishes him and also kind of renders him as a pathetic figure at the same time.
Yeah, you know, and you hit the nail on the head, Alison, when you said that he's a millionaire who's funded by billionaires. And I'm paraphrasing, you know, thoughts that have been expressed before, but it's sort of like he's a millionaire funded by billionaires who's trying to convince thousandaires that the hundredaires are coming for their jobs or coming for their little piece of this turf, right? And so, and in that regard, it makes him a fascinating figure for sure, but also one that, you know, I think people should be very wary of in the ways that you express in the film. And so we're really glad you were able to come on and talk to us about this, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it. As you said, the trailer looks remarkable. It's getting you know, a lot of applause in a lot of different circles. The film is called The Brink, and the director is Alison Klayman. Thank you so much, Alison.
Thank you so much.